One morning in Napa County, 135 people showed up to work and discovered their jobs no longer existed. No countdown, no transition period, no warning, just locked gates, silent buildings, and an empty parking lot. The facility belonged to a Coca-Cola bottling partner, a name that, for decades, meant stability, predictability, permanence. And yet, overnight, it vanished. This was not a slow decline. It was not a phased shutdown. It was a hard stop. And this is the part most people missed. This was not an isolated corporate decision. It was a signal. In the weeks surrounding that closure, similar announcements began appearing across California. In Salinas, in Modesto, in other logistics and bottling hubs that most Americans never think about, but that quietly employ thousands of working families. Each time, the language was the same. Consolidation, efficiency, optimization. But the human result was also the same. Workers sent home, local officials caught off guard, communities left asking the same question. Why now? California's economy is still massive, still innovative, still wealthy. But beneath the surface, something has been changing for years. And manufacturing is where you see it first. In 2010, manufacturing represented roughly 12% of California's economic output. By 2024, that number had fallen closer to 9%. That may sound abstract, but it translates into tens of thousands of jobs that no longer exist. Food and beverage production has been hit especially hard. Why? Because it sits at the intersection of three pressures that are all rising at once: energy costs, compliance costs, and logistical costs. Running a bottling plant or a packaging facility in California is now structurally more expensive than in almost any competing state. Electricity is more expensive. Real estate is more expensive. Insurance is more expensive. Permitting is slower. Regulatory overhead is heavier. For years, big brands tolerated this because California offered something in return: scale, talent, proximity to huge markets. But that balance has been shifting. Behind closed doors, corporate finance departments are no longer asking, "How do we grow here?" They are asking, "Does this location still make sense at all?" And increasingly, the answer is no. The Coca-Cola ecosystem is a perfect example. Over the past decade, the company has been quietly transforming itself, not into a manufacturer, but into a brand and marketing company. Instead of owning factories, Coca-Cola now prefers an asset-light model. It lets partners handle the physical bottling and distribution. The corporation focuses on branding, product design, and advertising. From a financial perspective, this has been extremely successful. Operating margins around 30%, free cash flow measured in the billions. But there is a hidden consequence. When production is no longer core to the business, factories become optional. And optional facilities are the first to be closed when costs rise. In 2025, Coca-Cola eliminated thousands of jobs worldwide and discontinued hundreds of products. Not because the company was in trouble, but because it was optimizing. That word. Optimizing. For investors, it means higher returns. For communities, it often means empty buildings. Reyes Coca-Cola Bottling, one of the largest operators in California, followed the same logic. Consolidating operations, closing plants, moving volumes to fewer sites. From a spreadsheet perspective, this makes perfect sense. From the ground level, it looks like something else entirely. It looks like retreat. And this is where California's political and economic debate begins to collide with reality. Because while some reports show that corporate headquarters are not fleeing the state en masse, something more subtle is happening. The physical, job-creating parts of the economy are thinning out. And once those leave, they rarely come back. Every time a major company closes a facility in California, the same argument erupts. Some say it proves the state has become hostile to business. Others say it is just normal economic evolution. The truth is more complicated and more uncomfortable. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, the number of corporate headquarters leaving the state is actually close to the national average. California is not emptying out. But that statistic hides something crucial. Headquarters are not where most people work. Factories, logistics centers, distribution hubs, and processing plants are. And those are exactly the facilities under the most pressure. They are sensitive to energy prices, to labor rules, to permitting delays, to compliance costs, to insurance, to zoning, to transportation friction. In other words, they are sensitive to everything that has become more complex and more expensive in California over the last decade. At the same time, automation and global competition have compressed margins. There is less room for inefficiency. So when executives compare California to Texas, Nevada, Arizona, or Tennessee, the math is no longer close. This does not mean California is collapsing. It means California is slowly specializing away from the kinds of jobs that anchor middle-class communities. Technology, biotech, finance, entertainment, these sectors still grow, but bottling plants, packaging facilities, food processing, and logistics hubs are moving. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily. And that is what makes it dangerous. Because slow structural change does not trigger panic. It triggers complacency. When the American Canyon plant closed, it became a political symbol overnight. Critics blamed taxes. Supporters blamed corporate restructuring. The governor's office responded with general statements about innovation and economic strength. But none of that changes the lived reality of the workers who lost their jobs. And none of it changes the deeper trajectory. The same confusion appeared around In-N-Out. Headlines claimed the company was leaving California. The truth was more nuanced. The company is expanding into the Southeast and opening offices there. It is not abandoning California. But here is the part that matters. Even the most California-rooted brands are now building operational escape hatches. Not because they want to leave, but because they feel they might need to. Tesla did this. Many others have done the same. This is what risk management looks like. It does not look like panic. It looks like quiet optionality. And optionality is the enemy of local stability. Once companies have alternatives, they start using them. Not all at once, but enough to change the fabric of entire regions over time. And this brings us to the real question. What happens to communities that lose their industrial anchors but do not gain technology campuses? What replaces those jobs? And how long does that transition take? History suggests the answer is not encouraging. Once manufacturing and logistics leave, the ecosystem that supports them erodes. Suppliers, maintenance, local services, training pipelines, the tax base weakens, and the town becomes more dependent on sectors that are less stable and less inclusive. This is not theory. It has happened before. And it is happening again, quietly, across parts of California. Here is the part no one likes to say out loud. California is not in crisis. But parts of California are being slowly hollowed out. Not by one decision, not by one law, but by a cumulative effect of cost, complexity, and corporate optimization. For most people, this will not show up as a dramatic headline. It will show up as fewer good jobs, longer commutes, more fragile local economies, and once that process starts, it is very hard to reverse. Because companies do not return to places they have already exited unless the entire cost structure changes. Now let's be clear. This is not about demonizing corporations. Their job is to maximize efficiency. That is what they are built to do. This is not even about demonizing California. It is about understanding trade-offs. You cannot build an economic model that systematically makes physical production more expensive and then be surprised when physical production leaves. You cannot rely forever on brand value, intellectual property, and software, while the logistics backbone slowly migrates elsewhere. And you cannot maintain a broad middle class without a broad base of mid-skill, mid-wage jobs. What happened to those 135 workers in Napa County is not a tragedy in isolation. It is a preview of a structural transition. Some communities will adapt, some will not. And the difference will not be decided by slogans. It will be decided by policy details, cost structures, and whether leaders are willing to acknowledge uncomfortable arithmetic. The most dangerous assumption right now is that this will somehow balance itself out automatically. It will not. Economic systems do not self-correct when incentives are misaligned. They drift. And by the time the drift becomes visible to everyone, it is already advanced. So here's the real question. What kind of economy does California want to be? One that is globally dominant in ideas, but thin in physical production? Or one that finds a way to keep both? That choice is still open, but not forever. Because once the infrastructure leaves, it does not come back easily. If you want to understand what is really happening beneath the headlines and why stories like this are going to become more common across the country, then follow this channel. Subscribe to Rachel Adams Reports, not for panic, not for noise, but to understand the real economic shifts before they become unavoidable.